I don't really think that we're at a point where we're ever going to see a truly, fully honest and open disclosure, in part because I think it isn't actually possible. Powerful corporations are probably making their own number of what we would think of as UFOs. Believe that there's a component of this phenomenon that is not from our human civilization. When you have a military that is unable to compete with these other objects, that's a national security issue. And that makes it important in some ways. Now, does that make these objects a threat? Well, it depends on how you define threat. Ufology has exploded. And it's funny because 10 years ago, almost a decade ago, I wrote a book called After Disclosure. AD, After Disclosure. And at that time, I wondered how might a disclosure event happen. And let me just be clear, I don't really think that we're at a point where we're ever going to see a truly, fully honest and open disclosure, in part because I think it isn't actually possible. I think too much information has been compartmentalized, particularly within the United States. I think too much of it's been privatized. I don't think that the United States president really has access to all the information, even legally, that the US president would want to have relating to UFOs. So I think this information has gone way beyond any kind of public accountability. But having said that, one thing I don't think I quite foresaw was how a faction that has government clearances would be able to position itself sufficiently to have allies in enough places to be able to get some kind of disclosure narrative out to the major media. And that's actually what TTSA has done to the Stars Academy. I don't know most of those people personally, other than Hal Puthoff, who I do know. The others I don't know directly, but I look at what they do, and what I see is essentially a variation of a group of people who've been sort of floating around since the 1980s trying to get to the center of this labyrinth. Back then they were called the Aviary. Then during the 90s, a lot of them started working for Robert Bigelow. And I think they still do. I think they're still essentially a Bigelow club, as it were, but doing what they feel is the right thing to be able to push forward a disclosure type of narrative while staying within the law and while being able to use their connections to get media attention as much as possible. And that's, I think, what they're doing.
I liked the whole To the Stars Academy at the start, and I even liked the first 2 or 3 episodes of Unidentified, but then it seemed to start repeating itself and using the word threat a lot. And it put me off a little bit, because I'm thinking, what's the narrative they're actually trying to get across here? Is that something you've picked up on yourself or you've heard?
I hear it a lot, and I've definitely noticed it. I thought in the 6th episode, it was the first time I thought, now it's a bit much. But I have to be fair about it. In my first 2 volumes of history of UFOs and the national security state, I took a very similar approach when I was writing a history of essentially military encounters with UFOs, objects invading sensitive airspace that were not supposed to exist, that outperformed anything that the United States military or other militaries could throw out at these things. So in that sense, when I wrote my first 2 volumes of history, I was very consciously at times focusing on military dimensions of this. Because why? Because I instinctively knew when you have a military that is unable to compete with these other objects, that's a national security issue. And that makes it important in some ways. Now, does that make these objects a threat? Well, it depends on how you define threat. They haven't engaged in shooting, as far as we know, shooting our aircraft down. However, they have engaged in activities that can be defined as hostile or threatening if they are over sensitive areas where they're not supposed to be. If they're snooping around areas where no one's supposed to be snooping around, any military is going to see that as a threat. I mean, to a hammer, every problem is going to look like a nail, and to a military person, every unknown craft that's over sensitive areas, it's not supposed to be there, is going to be perceived as a threat. That's normal. So I don't blame the military people for using that word. People can disagree. I think part of it, frankly, is a political move on their part. Political in the sense of, when you're dealing with a completely bored and uninterested public, uninterested media, a hostile scientific community, you're trying to get their attention How do you do that? Well, one way, obviously, is to play up the potential threat. So I think part of this is simply a convenient narrative for them to use to advance that program of theirs, which is to push forward this subject in the mainstream.
Yeah, they're not there to please the UFO community, are they, really?
No, well, there's never pleasing the UFO community. I mean, never. There are people who are, and it's one thing to be critical. We should always be critical. It's another thing even to be suspicious. But when you are so suspicious that you are truly paranoid about every single thing that they're doing without really even listening to them, then there's a problem. So I think that there have been UFO researchers who all that they do is pick apart the alleged motives of these guys without actually even listening to what they've said. I mean, think about it. If we were to go back in time 3 years ago, could we have predicted where we would be in terms of mainstream coverage of the UFO subject today? And I think the answer is no. And look, 90% of that, like it or not, has to do with TTSA. They pushed most of that forward. It's been unbelievable. No one else in this field, not me, not anyone else that I know, has been able to bring the UFO subject to this level of prominence in the mainstream. And I want to be clear. I will support what they do as long as what they do is truthful, as long as I don't think they're lying to us, as long as what they're putting out is relevant. And I will say that in the episodes of Unidentified, I've not detected a single lie. I've not detected anything that's not relevant. Everything they've said to me is relevant. So people will talk about, well, so-and-so lied about his background, or they're all associated with CIA. A, it's not true that they're all associated with CIA. B, if they've lied about their background, I haven't seen it. I haven't seen it proven. What I'm interested in is what they're saying and the information that they are putting out. They've given us the Tic Tac UFO incident, which by my estimation is possibly the best documented military UFO encounter we have now, of all. That's incredible. And it's, by best documented, I mean best number of witnesses, best caliber of witnesses, the most vocal. So there's a tremendous amount of information about that. The Eastern Coast USS Roosevelt carrier group off the coast of Virginia in 2014, 2015, similarly. A very, very impressive group of sightings that they brought out. So I support that, and I think that what we need is more, not fewer, discussion of these types of cases.
Are you surprised the general public hasn't reacted a little different? They've kind of taken it in the stride, like just news.
Yeah, I mean, we're at a point, well, I don't know what the full impact of this show has been. And I'm thinking of the show Unidentified. That's how people interact with TTSA mostly these days, through the TV show. How is this reaction? My sense is that they do pretty well in the ratings. My sense is that people, ordinary people who don't know the UFO subject, who don't live it like we would live it, are probably impressed by what they've seen. The quality of the show is good, certainly not poor. So I don't know how they're reacting, but I suspect that you're onto something when, if we think, well, they'll just roll with it and nothing much happens. And this is what's happened to our society. We've siphoned all of the action out of the public realm, and people, I don't really think there's a sense that people can really do anything about this. I think they're waiting for things to be done, and that's a sign of the times.
Where do you see, maybe not just TTSA, but where do you see this whole movement heading over the next 10 years?
Well, it's not going to be where it is today. The one thing that we have to know is tomorrow will not look like today. We're in such a tumultuous time. This is one thing that I think I did get right 10 years ago when I wrote After Disclosure, which is that you've got two impossibilities. You've got, how did I call it? I said that disclosure was impossible and inevitable. It was a paradox. I always perceived disclosure as impossible because there is no motivation for those people truly in the secret who've had it to want to give it up. It was too revolutionary, it was too disruptive. And I still think that is true. But it's also inevitable because one thing I did perceive is that our society, our civilization is in a constant state of revolution now, technologically. Particularly that's changing how we relate to each other socially. intellectually. You know, we can Skype each other around the world. We can trade information in ways that were not imaginable more than a decade ago, certainly not more than 20 years ago. So there's too much that's changing, and I've always perceived that that state, that technological infrastructure, as it were, is making things very unstable, very in flux. And I do believe that this movement now that we're seeing, this insider faction movement, and that is how I perceive TTSA, it's made it possible for them to do the things that they're doing. This could not have happened 10 years ago because I don't think we had this infrastructure. So I think we can expect more change. Now, where it's going to go is a good question. Every week it seems more toothpaste is coming out of the tube. It can't go back in. So now we're at a point where we have Navy pilots talking openly about men in black suits coming onto the USS Princeton, stealing radar data after a UFO encounter in 2004. Like, that's kind of interesting to hear about. And we're hearing much, much more about military encounters that are being fully acknowledged. So that doesn't go back in the tube. Now, where will it go? Well, the question is, how far can it go? So if we get to an acknowledgement, we're already at an acknowledgement that's well beyond what we could have imagined 2 years ago, where we have high-level government officials and scientists who are talking openly about this phenomenon. I'm thinking of a speech that Hal Puthoff gave a year ago at the Society of Scientific Exploration, 2018. An unbelievable speech that every single person connected with this field should know about. He's talking about an artifact that has been studied, that is of bismuth and magnesium of such a fine level of manufacture we can't reproduce it here. And he all but said it was extraterrestrial. It's unbelievable. So we're getting to a point where more and more of this is coming out. And I am waiting for the avalanche. So we're getting a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. When will we get to a critical mass where suddenly we all realize, as it were, the emperor is wearing no clothes and this is a real thing? I think that that will happen. And the real question is, well, when will that happen? I think it could happen within 5 years from now. I didn't always think that it could be within 5 years. I now think it could be. But the real question is, unlike how I predicted in my earlier book, would it lead to the true ripping open of all the veils of secrecy? And I'm of the current opinion, here in the middle of 2019, that probably not. It's too much of this that is sequestered. If the US President Trump right now were to demand within the Defense Department all of the access to these secrets, it's a real question as to whether or not he would have access to it. We had a leak of what I consider the most significant leak of the century in the UFO field, and that is of the Wilson documents. These are notes by scientist Eric Davis following his conversation with former Admiral Thomas R. Wilson from dealing with Wilson's encounter in 1997 as learning of a deep classified program to study reverse engineer alien technology. And although it appeared that Wilson had legal authority to regulate this program, he was denied access. I've known about this since 2006. I was shown 2 pages of those documents back then by an impeccable source. I knew this was real. Now that it's leaked out, we can talk about it. And in fact, over the years I have actually talked about it, but now we can really talk about it. But the point is, what we have is a runaway privatization of UFO information. And privatized in a way that appears to be legal within the system. So that is, in the US, people will pay taxes to a government that will then protect the intellectual property of private corporations so that they can make money off of this technology. The government will use its laws to protect the security of these private corporations, keeping all relevant Defense Department personnel out. And how high does it go? Do they lock the president out? I would say, I don't know for a fact, but I would say probably yes.
there's a lot of information going mainstream. A lot of people are awakening to the illusion that they've been living in the new reality. There's a lot more truths out there to be discovered. You've clearly been right into the rabbit hole, to the darkest parts of that hole. What information and what advice could you give to these new people, members of the public now that are suddenly getting this information thrust at them in mainstream news? Because it can be quite depressing and stressful when you start questioning your governments and the secrets and, wow, there actually could be extraterrestrials. Have you had your own issues with trying to process some of this information?
Absolutely.
Because it's not fun and games. It's very serious, this whole subject.
Yes, it is. I'm 57 years old now. When I started researching this, I was 32, 33 years old. And I thought back then that I was ahead of the curve, that I knew more things than most people. I was very proud of that. I'd studied in the university. I was working on a PhD in history, and then I came to this point where I stumbled into this subject, UFOs, and I thought, there's something interesting here, and I don't like having a big question mark hanging over my head. Is there something there, or is there not something there? I want to know. I don't like not knowing. So I thought I would spend 2 or 3 months of my life to research this and then move on. Well, that was over 25 years ago. What I discovered, not only was it real, but it was real in such a way that for the first year that I studied it, I distinctly remember staring at the bedroom ceiling many, many nights, trying to figure things out, realizing if this is true, then what does this say about all these other things I thought I knew? So it was difficult, and I can tell you I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to have to rethink my entire worldview. That was the last thing I wanted to do. When you get into your 30s and beyond, you like to think that you've got the world figured out. You're ready to join the world of professional, whatever it is you do, and you don't want to have to like reinvent the wheel. And I think looking back in my early 30s back then, I was probably at the perfect age. If I had gotten any older, it would have been really hard for me. But I was old enough that I had studied enough that I knew that I was onto something. So it was really a good age for me. But for young people now who are diving into this, I can tell them, it's a challenge. It is difficult. But the one thing that you have to know is that the act of maturing, the act of growing into the person you are destined to be, requires you to strip away the illusions you were born into. And not just one time, many times. Illusions about your society, illusions about yourself, mostly. And that's hard. No one wants to do that. But if you really want to grow, you've got to strip away. I wish it were as easy as in like the movie The Matrix. One red pill. Take one red pill. There's the truth. It doesn't work like that. You have to take red pills for the rest of your life. The first one's the hardest, but they keep coming. But my advice for someone who really doesn't want to be spoon-fed bullshit for the rest of their life, right? What you have to do is you have to work. So you have to unlearn, but that doesn't mean you just throw everything out. You have to put effort into learning this subject. This isn't a subject you just walk in and expect to master in a couple of months. Like, don't think that. It's an arrogant mistake, and too many people make it. I spent, for the first 5 years, I read hundreds of books, and I didn't just read them. I meticulously took notes and created a chronological database of facts with citation. Like, I really got into it. But it enabled me, it forced me to learn this history. And I can tell you it was worth every bit of effort and sweat that went into it, because there's an enormous factual database here. This is not a trivial subject. It's a difficult subject. So I would just, if someone is serious, if they're really serious, then throw yourself into this and learn it. And don't just learn it around the edges. There's an enormous amount of case history in here. There's an enormous amount of politics in here. There's a lot going on. So give it the respect it demands and do the work.
If you had your choice again, would you take the blue pill instead of the red pill? Because it is hard. You know, it's disturbing at times.
Never. I would never take the blue pill. It's a funny thing. I have 2 children. They're grown now, in their early 20s. My daughter, who is amazing, but you know, she went through her period when she was 10, 11, 12 years old, but she just thought her father was the neighborhood nut, right? So I remember back then she came into my office surrounded by UFO books and in her breathy voice said, "Dad, why can't you be a normal dad like all the other dads?" I laughed, I laughed at her. And I think I said, "Are you old enough to be taking drugs? Because that's the only excuse that I can give you for why you would say something so ridiculous. You know your dad can never be like this." Like, it's in my DNA. I have to be this way. So I'm always asking questions, and I gave up a lot. I'm just going to say, like, I had a nice career path in front of me. I thought I was going to teach at some university and have a nice little life there. I cannot tell you how glad I am that I avoided that road for many reasons and went on to be an independent writer and historian.
Does your daughter still think you're crazy?
No, my daughter now loves what I do. That's the awesome
she's
thing.
at the age now then to understand.
She's 20, 21, and she actually is into it, and she asks me questions about it all the time, so that's kind of nice. I'll just say, like, there were many years where I really struggled. It's always a struggle even now, but it was really hard for most of the 21st century for me, just even often to make ends meet. And I would often wonder, like, what am I doing here? Am I spinning my wheels? But the thing is, it's something where I can tell you I'm incapable. I can't just go get a job at some company. I just can't do it. So I'm not good for anything else. This is really the only thing that I'm good for.
Have you found it a spiritual experience learning the things you've learned? And is there any spirit? Is it just purely fact for you and bolts? I'm not being woo. I'm just wondering if, because it would have changed your personality. It would have changed who you are by going through this process. I'm just curious if you've gone on a spiritual path with it.
I think I don't know if I want to call it spiritual. To me, that's a word that can really get abused, and I don't like using it. It's become very fashionable to use it a lot, and I don't think it's always accurately used. So I don't know if I want to say it's been a spiritual experience, but I will say it's deepened me.
Yeah.
And one thing that has to be said, when you study any element of UFOs long enough, and to me, I study all of it. I don't just study sightings of military encounters. I've studied all types of sightings and abductions and all cases of alleged consciousness contact, you can say, with other types of entities, and I listen to it all. And I also will say that there's a definite mental consciousness element to the UFO subject. And I've also studied remote viewing, not as a participant, but I have studied. I married a remote viewer, but even before I married her, I've been fascinated by the remote viewers, partly because they all seem to encounter extraterrestrial in one form or another. So the study of UFOs has taken me into a lot of strange things, a lot of woo, and a lot of it I think is totally legit. So I think you have to take consciousness-related things into effect when you study this phenomenon. But having said that, I will say I think that a lot of what we might call New Age culture has been extremely damaging to the UFO field and actually a really negative influence. I think as it has to society in general. The idea of create your own reality is good in a way, but is really bad in a way. It enables people not to look at negativity, because then they say that gives negativity power. Well, that's a really great way to destroy your life and your society, by not looking at the problems that are there. So you have to acknowledge problems so that you can fight them and defeat them. You can't just run away from them. So there's an element of the New Age culture that it really does create its own little bubble, and it's a bad, bad place to be. So, and it also invites a lot of fakers, charlatans, and the people who are really strong believers are, I'm not going to name names, but are just so unbelievably naive. I'm astonished that they just believe every new person who comes along with their own story.
Yeah.
And so many of them are obvious attention seekers, and problematic in so many ways. So that's the downside of it.
Yeah, being human, I think it's always going to be with us, isn't it? In this community, we're going to have all different types of characters coming and going.
Well, we're human beings. We're not angels. We're humans. So we have our own flaws, which that's how we are. We're flawed beings. But I think I just go into this with keep your thinking cap on, keep your critical skills open, and don't just believe every single story that comes your way. Simple. Ask for evidence. Ask for evidence.
What does the evidence suggest to you at the moment? Obviously, we clearly have craft in the sky.
Right.
What percentage are actually ET, military? I mean, can you even put a figure to it?
I can't, but I will say that there's both that's out there.
Yeah.
And I think that, just lately I've spoken to a number of folks who've got good knowledge of this from the classified world. I hate doing this. I hate sounding mysterious. So I apologize. But I will just give my opinion that private corporations, private, powerful corporations are probably making their own number of what we would think of as UFOs. And that would mean space-based UFOs as well. Mm-hmm. So I think there's I called it a breakaway civilization 10 years ago. I think that that's a real thing. So there's that. And there's also a number of these that are not part of us. They're not our civilization. They're beyond. Whether they're from another planet or, there's different theories as to what these other beings are. Are they from another? Are they from here and live here? Have they lived here all along? Can they phase into our reality in some way? Are they right in front of our noses, but they phase in and out? There's all different theories about this. And I don't know the answer, but I do believe that there's a component of this phenomenon that is not from our human civilization.
What's your take on the whole Apollo mission and the moon landing? Is your research taking you down that route?
A little bit.
Did we land on the moon?
Yes, I think we landed on the moon. I do. I think we landed on the moon. But I will say that I also believe that we were followed and accompanied and observed on the moon. This is my opinion. I don't think that we did not go. I think we did go. And we could spend probably an hour on the reasons why I think we went. Too many missions. I mean, they even included Apollo 13 where they almost died. Like they faked that one. I think that we went. I don't think that the obstacles for landing were insurmountable, although they were difficult. But I think that there was more going on. I think that we have been observed on every single space-based mission that we've had, probably. And that's really what, there have been some good insiders from NASA who we know their names, we know their jobs, they've gone on the record and they've made these statements countless times, and all different people. So I think that's the truth. And I believe, actually, my colleague Timothy Good from the UK, who wrote about this. I spoke with him personally about it. He had an associate who's no longer alive, but attended a function in which this individual eavesdropped on a conversation that Neil Armstrong was having at a function, where a medical doctor asked Armstrong what really happened on the moon, that type of thing. And this individual overheard Armstrong essentially say that they were being monitored and watched. I asked Tim about that, and he said, look, this individual, rock solid. And that's just one. There's a lady named Donna Hare who worked at a NASA subcontractor called Philco Ford. She has her own stories. She's talked a lot about how all the Apollo astronauts had constantly been talking about being followed on the moon, on their way to and back from the moon. So I think the Apollo missions were monitored. And, I also think that there's a covert presence there. can't say with 100% certainty, but I would say if I had to bet a lot of money on it, I would say yes. And I think that there's other elements of a clandestine secret space program that also exist, that have enabled us using technology, some of which is off the shelf and some of which is not off the shelf and is still classified, to engage in activities in our solar system, at the very least, that no one knows about.
So do you think the fact that we've never been back to the moon, or we've been told we've never been back to the moon, is a lie? Do you think that's where the lie is within the whole moon landing hoax?
There's a lot of lies.
We have been back.
A lot of lies. Yes, I think so. I think we've gone back. I think that there's some kind of component there. I don't know if it's manned or not, but it could be. But definitely, I think we've gone back in a clandestine. I think that there's, I would say strongly that I think that there's been a classified manned space program for some time. And that this undoubtedly, and I'm saying this because I know I have reasons to say this, has a connection to a UFO/alien component to it. So there's a classified manned space program that at some level deals with the UFO phenomenon. Now, what is the level of their technology? I don't know how advanced they are. I don't think that they can manufacture the kinds of meta materials that, you know, we heard Hal Puthoff talking about a year ago in his lecture of, you know, nano and angstrom level engineering that I don't believe we've got the capability to do. But I do think that in a number of ways we've achieved certain kinds of breakthroughs in propulsion, maybe some in material science, but definitely propulsion, that are enabling us to go places.
How do you think these organisations can be so sloppy at times when people like Gary McKinnon come along and seem to just gate crash their computer systems? Because I know you've spoken to Gary recently on your show. How do they make mistakes like that?
Well, Gary, you know, he could tell you better than I could, but he seems to have gotten into the like the U.S. Space Command website and related sites at exactly the right time in history. He got to them at a time in history where we had enough connectivity, you know, with modems that he could access it, and early enough before really active security measures were in place to prevent what he did. And you know what he did is he didn't even really hack. He just created a little Perl script where he basically went to all of these systems, and if they had no password, or if their password was password, it's that simple, he got in. Can you imagine? So it was just absolutely, by our standards today, 20 years later, utterly lax. I mean, criminally lax security, but at the time, it wasn't criminally lax. I think it takes time for people to realize, and he just was very clever, he was very focused, he knew what he was looking for, and he found a few things. So I don't know if that's likely to happen anymore. I think security measures are way, way, way better than that. I wondered, you know, if there's enough public anger, could there be Occupy Area 51? And that's actually what I wrote. Occupy Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Would there be enough angry citizens actually to go en masse to a place like Area 51? And now here we are a decade later and we're seeing this movement. Now the people who are running this movement seem like they do not have their heads screwed on straight. I'm just going to say this. They're talking about these stupid video games. We're going to do Naruto running. I had to look that up. What is Naruto running? Well, it turns out it's all video game stuff. This is ridiculous. You're not going to outrun bullets, people. And furthermore, to walk through that, that's going to be impossible. Yeah. Like, you would have lots of people will die.
I think it's interesting that how many people have acknowledged it, though, in the mainstream as well.
Over 1 million people have signed it.
Yeah, every newspaper in the UK is talking about it. It's big news.
Yeah, it's a hashtag, it's a thing, it's a meme, but it's obviously not going to go anywhere. Nothing will come of this.
What do you think would happen?
Well, I don't think it will happen, but if there were to be a genuine group of people to start this, they'll run into security personnel. Yeah. And look, there's a lot of really thoughtless people who think it's all fun and games. Yeah. And you go out to those facilities, and I can assure you, those security personnel do not take this lightly, and they will, at the very least, and I have some people that I know who were foolish enough during a television show to jump up and down over the line because they didn't think there was anyone there. They did it long enough, and here come the guards, and they made them lie face down in the dirt for 2 or 3 hours just to teach them a lesson. Mm-hmm. That's minimal. These guards are not going to play games. No. And even with, there won't be 500,000 people. There won't even be 1,000 people, maybe. Won't be more than that.
What's your research shown you of Area 51? Anything of interest?
Yes, I think there's S4. I think that's a real place. Look, the United States has an overwhelming amount of what one author called blank spots on the map. So these are places that are not on any Google Earth image that you're going to find. And they are very, very classified, and you can't go in there. So I don't know how much of this world is filled with it, but a lot. There are technologies to build deep, deep, deep facilities well under the ground, deep under the ground, that people will never have access to. There's a lot of, particularly out in the American West, there's a lot of nothing out in many of these areas, and you can't get to them. So they do what they want. They are a law unto themselves.
Why does it seem to be America leading this kind of disclosure charge? Everything seems to be around about America with UFOs. There's
a certain thing with American culture. You know, I'm an American citizen. I'm a New Yorker American citizen. We're kind of a pushy lot, we New Yorkers. But Americans in general have thought about this, you know. There is something, it hasn't gone away, there's an entitledness that Americans have, and it's not all bad. Americans are a nation that was founded on a principle. And I don't know they self-consciously founded their nation on a principle having to do with the rights of individual people and the rights of people to have government responsive to them, not the reverse. It's a big, big part of the American psyche, I can tell you. And so it's, even now, you know, we're in a new era in the 21st century, and that's being beaten down, in my view. But it's still there. And it's more there in America than in any other nation I know of. I've done enough travel, and there's a lot of beautiful places in this world, but Americans are pugnacious, and that's an annoying quality, but it can be a good quality. And so within the United States, Americans, many of them, do not like the fact that they can't get answers from their government on this matter. And it bothers them to no end. I'm one of those Americans. It bothers me to no end. I don't know if I'll ever get all that I want. I probably won't. But it's something I believe in. That's the truth. I get misty-eyed about it when I think of it, too, to be honest with you. I think that there's something beautiful about that vision of how to create a nation in which the government is responsible to you. And I'm never giving that up. That they'll pry that ideal out of my cold, dead fingers.
Why does E.T. seem to have an interest with America? Or do you think it's just that the Americans shout about it more than other countries?
That's a good question. Well, I think it's a little bit of both. There has been an interest in America, partly, at least go back to the 40s, because of the nuclear technology. So America was clearly the world's leader in nuclear tech back in the 40s and 50s. Think of the Roswell incident that occurred in the very close proximity of the only nuclear-armed base in the world at the time. I don't think that's an accident. In the in the 1940s and 50s and 60s particularly, we know of a large number of UFO encounters in which these objects were seen over sites dealing with nuclear technology and nuclear manufacture, whether Oak Ridge Laboratories in Tennessee or Los Alamos National Labs or the Hanford nuclear atomic energy commission plant in the state of Washington, or many others. Uranium mines, even in the Belgian Congo. We have a report from 1952 on that. So there's a nuclear connection. Looks real to me. And so that would definitely involve the Americans in the early period, without a doubt. America in the late 40s, early 50s was unquestionably the world's leading military power. It still is. So if you're an outside intelligence looking at the leading weaponry of planet Earth, yeah, you couldn't avoid the United States. But of course, what we know is UFOs are seen everywhere. They're seen in Britain. They're seen in Russia. They're seen throughout Europe. They're seen in China. We know about this. They're probably seen in Africa more than we are getting reports. We have some African reports, but not a lot. But a lot of it has to do with the infrastructure for reporting these things. So within North America, I'll include Canada here, the US and Canada, in my view, have by far the best reporting mechanisms that I'm aware of in the world to take in raw reports. We've got two websites that are amazing. We've got the National UFO Reporting Center, and we have the MUFON website, and both of those will take 6,000 to 7,000 sightings a year. And there's not a lot of overlap, I don't think. I'm not aware of such websites existing anywhere else in the world. So I think what we really need more of, much more of, is websites to collect national, even raw reports from citizens from around the world, and then we can really get an idea of where these things are being reported. It's a horrible lack of knowledge when you think about it. You know, I mean, the U.S. and Canada have comprised a small percentage of the global population, and they're pulling down 15,000 plus sightings a year of raw reports. You have to assume there's even much more activity elsewhere in the world, and we're not getting a tiny fraction of it. So we need that data.